The stamp didn't come. That's where this story begins. One delayed hand at a U.S. immigration booth turned what should have been a routine passport scan into a twisting hallway of suspicion. Jenny stood there, bags in hand, exhausted, maybe even relieved as she landed back on American soil after years of chaos overseas. No red flags in her mind, no panic, no reason to brace. But the seconds stretched long enough to tell a different story. The officer wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking through her. Welcome to Reality Sport. I'm Oliva. Subscribe and join the conversation. You won't believe what really happened at the airport, or what didn't happen at all in India. Tell me in the comments. If you returned home expecting peace and instead walked into suspicion, what would you do? Jenny didn't come back to a war zone. She came back for silence. A normal bed. Familiar cereal boxes in the grocery store. Walls without judgment. When she boarded the flight from New Delhi, she told herself this trip was a reset, not an exit, just a break from the noise. A little space from late-night shouting matches that never got loud enough to name the problem. She told herself Sumit understood, that things were fine, tense but manageable. She brushed off the goodbye as awkward. They were used to complications. He was quiet. She was tired. That didn't mean anything, right? But when she slid her passport across the counter in the U.S., the energy shifted. Not like a movie moment. No cold stare or booming voice saying, "You're under arrest." Instead, it was the kind of slow that makes your stomach twist without understanding why. The officer scanned, paused, scanned again, then clicked something on his screen. Silence. No questions, no warm welcome, just a look that said, "Please come with me." Everyone thinks the drama ends when the plane lands. But for Jenny, the real story started the moment her wheels touched down. Secondary inspection. Fluorescent lights that hum. A bland metal chair that feels colder the longer you're forced to sit in it. Jenny didn't cry, didn't yell. She stayed polite, cooperated. Because she had nothing to hide, or so she thought. This wasn't her first interaction with paperwork. She had spent years explaining her relationship to strangers with clipboards. People questioning love as a strategy rather than a fact. She thought she knew bureaucratic discomfort by heart. But this time, it all felt different. She wasn't explaining her relationship. She wasn't even allowed to explain anything yet. Her phone was taken. No exact reason given. Routine, they said. Routine didn't feel like this. Minutes turned to hours. No one offered coffee or context. And weirdly, no one asked about Sumit. Not even once. That absence? It hung in the room heavier than any accusation could. Every silence starts to echo when there's no clock, no updates, and most terrifying of all, no idea who's on the other side of the wall, pulling levers on decisions you don't even understand yet. You'd expect someone to say what this was about. A date missed on a form? A misunderstanding at customs? But the words that finally floated across the table weren't any of those. They were colder, sharper. Words that had power stitched into them. Flagged. Secondary review. Not random. Jenny blinked. Her back stiff against that chair, her mouth dry. This wasn't a mix-up. Someone, somewhere, had made a decision. To mark her, to watch her, to wait for her landing. If this was about her trip to India, why didn't anyone bring up India? Why didn't anyone mention Sumit at all? They didn't need to. The silence said enough. But here's the question no one could answer. Why was a U.S. citizen flagged at re-entry over a marriage abroad? And why now? Stay with me, because what Jenny didn't know yet is this entire story already had wheels in motion miles away in India, where someone else had quietly stopped waiting for the truth to arrive. The door didn't slam. It clicked. Soft. Clean. Too polite to panic you. But Jenny felt that sound in her chest. That tiny, final tap of metal sliding into place did more damage than any shouted order ever could. Because it was quiet. And final. The room on the other side was smaller than she expected. Too white, too cold, with no windows. A chair built to remind you of detention, not comfort. Metal pressed against her skin like a question mark. And still, no one told her what this was. She sat there with her backpack at her feet, and her coat still folded across her arm like she hadn't fully accepted she was staying. Time began changing shape almost immediately. Minutes flattened. The humming light above her head turned into a kind of torture she couldn't shut out. She uncrossed and recrossed her legs. She rubbed her thumb across her palm like the friction might charge her brain back to life. When someone knocked and entered, she straightened. Not afraid, not angry, just ready to clarify. Surely, this was about some mistake. An inconsistency. Names can get mixed up, especially in international travel. Her mind prepared calm explanations with valid reasons. Temporary visa confusion, a misfiled form, even random selection. The man across from her didn't ask for clarification. He asked for her phone. That was the first real chill. He didn't bark the order. He said it plainly, like it was normal. She looked at him, trying to read if this was urgent or scripted. She handed it over. No argument. Because arguing, she told herself, looks guilty. She wanted to look trustworthy, helpful, the kind of person who answers and moves on. But as soon as the phone left her hand, something shifted. The room got smaller. Her story started losing weight. Flagged. That's the word they finally used. Calmly. As if it wasn't a big deal. As if being tagged inside a system built for catching lies wasn't personal. Her passport was flagged upon entry. No additional explanation. No cause stated. Just that. The kind of word that implies something vague but dangerous, like a trap you can't see clearly until your foot's already in it. She tried to ask what it meant. The man didn't respond with specifics. He asked questions instead. Where had she been living in India? With whom? For how long? Under what legal status? What was her marital situation today? Right now? Jenny answered. But her answers weren't crisp. She realized that. Her voice cracked a little. Not from guilt. She didn't feel guilty. But from fatigue. The kind that collects when you've spent too many years explaining yourself. Her voice sounded thinner than her thoughts felt. She named timelines, dates, months, statuses. But they blurred. There were extensions, interviews, days filled with legal jargon she didn't memorize because she relied on someone else to memorize it for her. Sumit handled that part. He was good with forms. Better with deadlines. She had trusted him with that, and here's where that trust started to splinter. Not because someone accused her of lying, but because she herself couldn't remember with certainty. That's when doubt creeps in. Not about guilt or innocence, but about clarity. She knew she'd lived honestly, but now she wasn't sure if honestly and correctly were still the same thing. The agent made no comment on her answers. He only looked at the screen, scrolled once, then stood up. I'll be back in a moment. He left nothing behind but the hum of the light and the sound of Jenny's own heart adjusting to a new rhythm. One that didn't match her expectations anymore. Silence isn't neutral when it stretches this long. It changes people. It doesn't scare you directly. It exposes thoughts you didn't have room for when things were busy. She began thinking about Sumit, not with fondness, with calculation. Where was he right now? Had he tried to text her? Did he even know she hadn't made it past immigration yet? Her phone was gone. There was no way to know. But one thing dug into her brain like a needle. If this had been about something small, he would have warned her. He would have said something. Because Sumit hated risk. He wasn't reckless. He was strategic. And if he hadn't warned her, was that because this wasn't a surprise for him? This didn't feel like fresh confusion anymore. Not random, not sudden. It had the smell of something older, something prepared. So now the question was, is this just tangled paperwork? Or is this the quiet explosion of something that's been ticking for months or longer? You're going to want to hear what happened next. Because Sumit's silence? Back in India? It wasn't accidental. And it sure didn't look temporary. While Jenny sat under humming lights and metal chairs, waiting for answers in a fluorescent box at the U.S. Immigration Office, half a world away, Sumit's shoes hit the cracked pavement with quiet urgency. No goodbyes, no emotion, just motion. He shut his phone off with a sharp flick like the screen had said something offensive. That tiny gesture said more than a whole speech ever could. The house in India, once chaotic with overlapping conversations and last-minute visa concerns, felt eerily relieved. His parents watched his exit from the hallway without reacting. No questions. No hesitation. Their silence? Not shock. It was permission, the kind of silence that floats across a room when people have already decided it's not their mess to clean anymore. There wasn't a hug, not even a message me when you reach. Only that dry, quiet space you hear when something's already gone. Earlier that day, he'd resigned from his job. Not in person, not with grace. A short voice note. Personal issues, immediate exit. No notice, no explanation. When HR responded asking for clarification, he didn't bother replying. There's disappearing, and then there's vanishing with intent. No one at the office knew he was leaving. His emails were cleared. VPN logged out. His desk already empty. Not messy or rushed. Just scooped clean like he'd never planned to return. He hadn't even looked back at the building. That night, under a flickering streetlight, Sumit stood alone with a folded piece of paper in his palm. He smoothed it flat. Once. Then again, his eyes scanned it quickly, but with the kind of care that suggested he already knew every line. This paper wasn't from Jenny. This wasn't some romantic letter or lost love token sealed with tears. It was legal. Tight. Tidy. Black text on white. A sealed complaint. Not viral. Not tabloid material. No police barging through the door. No handcuffs. But official. Filed quietly. Months ago. In someone else's name. It accused him of using a marriage for immigration delay, withholding accurate marital status, allowing asset transfers under misleading representation, and interfering with another woman's visa file. The complaint didn't explode. It sat. It waited until Jenny's flight finally gave it meaning. And now, with her gone, that complaint had space to breathe. On paper, she looked like a wife. In practice, she was a filter, standing between scrutiny and whatever Sumit didn't want anyone to see. The people around him had noticed, of course. Nothing about his exit truly escaped the neighborhood. They weren't blind, just quiet. They've seen too much over time. The bags moved at odd hours, the shift in his posture, the lowered tone during conversations on the phone. Lights burning late, doors locked quicker, fewer shared meals. A neighbor mentioned the police had simply stood outside earlier for nearly half an hour. No knocks, no search, just waiting. The kind of waiting that's supposed to be seen, not heard. It wasn't a raid, it was a warning. This is how consequences move when they're done being patient. Sumit walked fast. Not desperate, just committed. Like someone who had been ready for Plan B all along. Like, this wasn't escape, it was timeline. And the more you look at the timing, the clearer the shape becomes. Jenny left. Seconds later, something moved. Sumit's sudden silence was not born out of panic. Panic is loud, reactive. This was quiet. And in legal matters, quiet is the deadliest sound of all. Officials don't need to yell when they've already filed the paperwork. So the question hanging in the air is no longer if Jenny was lied to. It's much worse. What was Sumit running from? And who knew enough to put his name And maybe hers, in a sealed legal complaint before the drama even began. Hold tight, because what's inside that folder is big. But what it doesn't say might be bigger. Back inside the dull white room, where time refused to move, Jenny watched a clock that wasn't there. The hum in the ceiling had become her heartbeat. For the third hour, maybe the fifth, she couldn't tell. She sat upright, trying to look reasonable in a place that didn't care about feelings, only facts. She wasn't being shouted at. No one was threatening her. That was almost worse. Her interrogator wasn't hostile. He was calm, efficient, professionally indifferent. That's how you know they're serious. Names on documents. Dates of entry. Duration of stay. She answered every question honestly. At least. As honestly as she thought she could. Because her mind, usually sharp, was fogged. The numbers didn't align the way she remembered. The timelines drifted as she recalled them. There were too many extensions, too many rushed signings, too many moments piled on top of other moments that blurred into calendar soup. But that's not what made her shift in her seat. It was the phrase repeated twice, casually, almost like someone reading off a checklist. This wasn't random. Not random, as in not a glitch in the database. Not general screening. Not random meant someone submitted a name. Not random meant a file had been opened long before she walked back into the country. Not random meant intention. Someone had flagged her. On purpose. They weren't just reviewing her past. They had a copy of it. The deeper the questions went, the more invasive the neutrality became. The agent never broke eye contact, but he also never gave a clue. Every question sounded clean, but each one aimed to extract something specific, not confession. Confirmation. She realized she wasn't being asked about what happened. She was being used to complete an outline someone had already drawn. The outline didn't match the marriage she thought she was in. Not even close. She was starting to understand what review really meant. This wasn't a routine check. It was reconnaissance. They were mapping her history against someone else's timeline. And the more they asked, the more one fact began to hollow her out from the inside. No one had asked about Sumit. Not once. Because they already knew. They knew enough about him to treat his absence like information. Jenny scanned the agent's face for any suggestion of where this thing was leading. But it was like trying to read a page without text. When he excused himself again, she sat in silence. And for the first time since landing, she stopped rehearsing answers and started facing something uglier. A sentence rose in her body like a bruise. Not dramatic, not screamed, quiet and steady. She whispered it out to no one, as if admitting it might make her disappear entirely. I was never the wife. I was the delay. Not a partner, not a priority. Not some poor soul tangled in mistakes. A tool, a well-placed name on paper. A placeholder that served its function better if she stayed obedient, tired, and trusting. And the love that she thought protected her? It hadn't shielded her. It had been the strategy. Sumit hadn't needed her passport. He needed her presence. Needed her to sit quietly between immigration and exposure. Every time someone questioned him, he had a foreign spouse to point at. Every time someone asked about financial clarity, he had someone else's paperwork to slide across the table. Every single delay in his life looked excusable, with Jenny sitting in the background. She remembered moments now with new clarity, forms handed to her half-filled, explanations delivered with confidence, deadlines whispered at midnight after long, exhausting arguments. And each time she asked for details, he answered with emotions. I'm handling it. Why don't you trust me? You're making this harder. Tension disguised as intimacy. Control dressed as comfort. People think manipulation always looks like gaslighting or isolation. No. Sometimes it looks like love offered in exchange for silence. And she took that deal, repeatedly, because it meant peace, or at least a temporary break from fighting. And now, it was all being peeled back with polite questions and technical vocabulary that didn't need her emotions to finish the job. She shook her head the next time someone entered, not as a refusal, but as quiet understanding. This investigation wasn't about miscommunication. It was about placement, position, delay. Because if she wasn't the endgame for Sumit, then who or what was she standing in front of? Which leads to the question that shattered her certainties all over again. If Jenny was used as the delay, what exactly was waiting to happen when she moved out of the way? And why did it need her gone? It always starts with a signature. One line at the bottom of a page, scribbled half awake, half listening, thinking you're saying yes to peace, not paperwork. And then weeks later, it shows up again. Viral. Leaked. Without warning. Staring back at you like a stranger holding your own face. Jenny scrolled down slowly. A blurry phone photo of a legal document had surfaced on social media. An official property transaction tied to Indian Holdings. Her name was right there, stamped in ink. The signature had every curve she recognized. Every loop was hers. She couldn't deny that. But she didn't remember signing it. Not that specific page, not that context. Not with knowledge, not with consent that felt real. Something inside her shifted. A cold, hard click in the chest. That document felt like a window into a room she'd been living in, but hadn't really looked around. She started replaying evenings in that crowded house in India. The stress, the fatigue, the moments when she was too emotionally drained to ask for full explanations. She remembered Sumit's voice at 11:30 p.m., calm but rushed. "It's standard, Jenny. I'll explain everything after." "It's too late to get into the details now," she nodded. Every time. She wanted the night to end. She wanted the argument not to happen. She wanted to believe everything was organized. She wanted peace. So she trusted. This wasn't about signing a paper. It was about all the moments. Small, tired, forgettable. Where trust felt easier than clarity. That's where the gray area lives. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't naive. She wasn't even reckless. She was surviving. Coping, shuffling through emotional minefields daily in a foreign country, under glaring eyes, cultural pressure, legal tension, isolation, and emotional burnout. When you're living on edge every day, "Don't worry, I've got it," starts sounding like a lullaby. Sumit took over the logistics, the taxes, the translation, the talking to agents. He said things like, "You don't need to stress with the ease of someone who understood she was looking for relief, not precision." And she leaned into that. Leaned hard. Because when love is your only safety net, questioning it feels like setting fire to your own life raft. She remembered moments, yes. Signing a file on the coffee table with a pen that barely worked, initialing a corner while glancing at WhatsApp chats from her daughters. Trusting the words, "This protects both of us." Filing it away in her brain under "We'll explain it someday." That someday never came. Now, that piece of paper was being shared by strangers online. The caption under it wasn't kind. The implications weren't subtle. People were connecting its signature date to her exit date. And that line, the one she barely remembered signing, was being interpreted as knowledge, as involvement, as complicity. She sat on her bed, staring into nothing, and the weight of it was suffocating. She wondered, what else did she miss? What else did she authorize without knowing? What else had she silenced her questions for? Her memory, usually dependable, suddenly blurred under pressure. She couldn't tell if she'd blacked things out or if they were never clear to begin with. And that's when the real fear kicked in. Not that she did something wrong, but that she'd spent years doing what was asked of her without asking enough in return. That's not obedience. That's trained helplessness. Emotional erosion disguised as harmony. She looked at the photo of the document again. And for the first time, it wasn't shock she felt. It was sadness. Sadness for the version of herself that had always said, "I trust you," when her gut was whispering, "You need to ask more questions." Because if trust signed that page, then what was the price? The deeper question had nothing to do with lawyers. It was personal. Gutting. Almost too sharp to hold. Did she ever say yes? Or did she quietly stop saying no? The next piece of information would make that question even harder to ignore. There was no official statement, no denial, no handwritten note left on the pillow. Just silence. And silence, as Jenny was now learning, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it tightens, it hardens, it starts shaping a narrative more dangerous than words ever could. Sumit's disappearance didn't feel chaotic. It felt chosen. Back in the US, Jenny had been released from secondary inspection. No apology. No resolution. Just a brisk explanation: your return status is under review. You're not being charged. At this time, she was allowed to leave, but the weight didn't lift. If anything, it got heavier. Because now, she had her phone back, and with it came the storm. Missed calls, messages, articles, social backlash spinning at full speed, headlines speculating connections, tweets asking why she hadn't seen it sooner, Instagram posts diagnosing her trauma like they'd been inside her head. And then, the leaks. One after another, words she hadn't read before, words she barely recognized, all tied to her name. The inquiry had widened. Not officially, of course. Officially, they called it cross-border coordination and document analysis. Harmless terms, on paper. But in practice, it meant surveillance, frozen emotions, a distributed silence that was now thicker than any arrest warrant. One sentence in particular kept following her. There may be movement of assets associated with overseas entities near the window of spousal departure. That sentence wasn't printed on tabloids. It was part of an internal probe summary she'd gotten through her legal advisor. And while it didn't name her directly, she didn't need binoculars to see the implication. She was the spousal departure. Sumit was the overseas entity. The timeline was too neat. Funds adjusted in Indian accounts just days before her flight. Documents filed under both names. Paper trails too clean to be spontaneous. The question on everyone's mind was now being shaped with forensic precision. Did Jenny know? Was the delay her marriage created used to move something or hide it? She didn't have answers. Only pieces. And every day Sumit stayed silent, the pieces rearranged into something darker. At first, Jenny defended him, instinctively. That was her pattern. He's probably scared. He doesn't know what's happening here. He would never trap me. But fear faded. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was clarity. And it hurt more, because if this had blindsided him, he would have crashed into it, not stepped out quietly. He wasn't confused. He had been ready. And slowly, Jenny began to realize what everyone else already suspected. Disappearance was not fear. Disappearance was design. Sumit didn't run because the situation exploded. He left because it didn't need to. It had already worked. Now, the people around Jenny were backing away too. TLC issued no public statement, only internal messages suggesting content decisions were on hold pending clarity. Producers who used to follow her with cameras and mics now replied to emails with phrases like, "We're monitoring for updates." Her own family wasn't calling, not out of blame, but uncertainty. When no one knows how legally entangled someone is, conversations start to feel like ticking clocks. Safer to stay quiet than say something that might be used. And even her daughters, once fiercely loyal, seemed to be parsing every move. Jenny caught it in their tone, the hesitation, the pauses she'd never heard before. Suddenly, love didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a filter. Everything had to pass through suspicion first. Online, it was worse. People either pitied her or trashed her. There was no middle ground. Poor Jenny, blinded by love. Simon, you expect us to believe she didn't notice all those signatures? She always defended him. That makes her complicit. She needs justice. She needs charges. She needs help. Help. That one stung hardest, because it stripped away every bit of agency she thought she'd earned after years of climbing out of bad decisions. Help meant broken. It meant incapable. And even though she did feel like pieces, she didn't want that label put on her by strangers with hashtags. She didn't want a savior. She wanted the truth. She had spent years explaining her relationship. Years of smiling through interviews, holding Sumit's hand on reality TV sets, justifying choices that broke cultural norms to millions of skeptical viewers. And now, that same marriage was being read like a spreadsheet. Not intimate, not emotional, functional. That's what made her stomach turn. Because when you remove the feelings and stare at the math, it told a different story. Her presence delayed other processes. Her marriage changed Sumit's legal profile. Her trust created windows of pause in documentation. She didn't realize it at the time. She wasn't scripted into that. But the system knew. And the absence of Sumit's voice? That was no longer something to explain away with emotion. His silence had graduated from confusion to strategy. Because the fewer statements made, the fewer receipts to trace, the less that's said, the harder it becomes to prove motive. In the eyes of legal systems, intent is slippery. Silence makes it slip faster. And Jenny? She was standing dead center in it, tethered to a man she couldn't reach, tied to documents with her own signature, surrounded by a machine that no longer needed her to explain because it had enough to examine. She started pulling up photos, texts, records, trying to find something, some screenshot or paper trail that pointed to a more innocent explanation. But there was nothing clean, nothing linear. Love doesn't leave receipts. And even if trust was misused, the fact remained, her name legitimized the infrastructure, whether knowingly or not. That's what made this moment so dangerous. She wasn't arrested. She wasn't exonerated. She was gray space, pending, under review. Nobody's favorite category, where sympathy feels suspicious, and silence is interpreted as guilt. So now the world had a new question. Was Jenny the victim of a manipulative plan, or the quiet shield who enabled one long enough for it to work? And if she was just a shield, then why was her name the one showing up on everything that moved? What you're about to find out might change how you see loyalty. Forever. She didn't sit down with a checklist. There was no whiteboard, no red string connecting dots, just a blank notebook and an aching need to know. Not feel. No. Jenny started with the smallest thing. The dates. Every visa extension, when it was filed, when it was approved, the timeline of their marriage license, then the strange gaps between visits to Sumit's office, the names on shared accounts, when they were opened, when they changed. Alone in a silent room, she began building something the authorities already had. A pattern. Each extension of her stay coincided with paperwork adjustments she hadn't fully noticed at the time. Extensions that bought someone time. The trips she rescheduled. The deadlines she missed. On their own, they had looked like life happening. Together, they looked like timing. Timing that worked suspiciously well for someone who no longer answered his phone. Sumit didn't manipulate her with lies. He didn't need to. He used trust because trust rarely comes with receipts. She remembered the midnight forms skipped over, with a brief line about required Indian consent for American spouses, the documents that slid across the floor when she was emotionally fried after a family argument. The way confusion was always framed as impatience. Don't stress. It's taken care of. This helps both of us. We don't have time to get into all that. And every time, she nodded. She thought she was agreeing to love. She was signing away certainty. The most unnerving realization? It all worked better because she believed it was love. That belief slowed her questions, softened her logic, turned her into cooperation on autopilot. Now, she saw it not as chaos, but architecture. It had corners. It held weight. It had been functioning under the label of marriage. But this wasn't a marriage. It was a mechanism. Not every system is made of wires. Some are built from people who don't say no. She stared hard at a printout of that leaked property liquidation form. Her signature at the bottom was perfect. Disturbingly perfect. Not forged. Not tampered with. Real. And that made it worse, because it meant something moved with her name on it, while she packed carry-on luggage, thinking she'd be back in a few weeks. The question didn't twist now. It drilled. Was the timing of her trip, encouraged by Sumit, softened with "you deserve a break," actually her exit? And if he had been waiting for her to step out of the way, was she ever meant to come back with him? Or was she always meant to stay back for him? That possibility hit differently. Not as betrayal, but as subtraction. A relationship you thought you were living in, that someone else had quietly exited months ago, and you just hadn't gotten the memo. No cameras had captured that moment. No TLC crew had been there to film the shift. It didn't happen in a fight. Or a grand reveal. It happened every time she said okay to something she didn't understand out of love. Or worse, out of exhaustion. Because fatigue doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes, it looks like a smile at the end of a tense day followed by a pen sliding into your hand. Jenny closed her eyes and asked herself the most painful question of all. And it wasn't about the law. It wasn't, did I commit a crime? Or was he lying the whole time? It was this. Did I spend years holding the door open for someone who was already gone? She breathed. The room felt colder. Not because the temperature had changed, but because clarity is colder than confusion. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't twist. It delivers. She wasn't asking for closure anymore. Closure was a luxury. She had sharp understanding now. And it would scar differently, because love didn't end here. What ended was the illusion that love had kept her safe. There would be more documents to review, more processes to endure. But emotionally, the line had already been drawn. Jenny had stepped over it, barefoot, unexpected, awake. And until now, she believed she had been part of a love story with obstacles. But what she was really inside was a timeline that ended exactly where someone else needed it to. So now, the real question begins. And it's not, will Sumit come back? No. That part's already written. The only question that still claws at the edge of this story is simple and sharp. If Jenny was just a delay, who's the one who finally walked through the door she was holding open? Go watch the next episode. You're going to find out.